So again, the idea of caring for the Lord's folk is a positive thing in Israel because Israel reinforced, or the Levites rather reinforce, hopefully, faithfulness to God. And when you quit doing what you're supposed to be doing, who suffers? It's not just you, but it's who else? It's your fellow Israelite who suffers because of your lack of faithfulness. So again, what did that cause individuals to do? Levites, when Israel wasn't faithful. Well, they would go and officiate at pagan rites and rituals because they needed to make a living somehow, and so there was compromise. So there's a problem there. Yes, sir, Ed?
Well, usually, it's a direct connection with what you're, with the support or the following of God's law, God's rule and instructions, as far as supporting the priest and their faithfulness to God. I mean, the connection, there's a connection when you support something financially to your engagement with that, to your value of that. And you just can see when that stopped, there's almost always a correlation to when something else suffered.
Yes, absolutely. So you're absolutely right. You know, where your money is, there's where your heart is, right? I think Jesus says something along those lines, right? Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So again, same principle. You're absolutely right. And then the prophet. Now, what was the prophet? We had several classes on the minor prophets. Was he from the very start a figure in Israel, or is that something that came later? What was his role? What was that, TJ? National conscience. He was the guy who came in and encouraged people to do right. So they were very, very highly esteemed, right? No, they were not. Again, you look at Hebrews chapter 11, really beginning in verse 32 throughout the rest of that text, and we see how they treated the prophets. It says they were stoned, they were sawn asunder, they were tempted, they were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and in goatskins, being destitute, tormented, afflicted, of whom the world was not worthy. So again, you get this picture of the prophets. They have a unique and authoritative role in Israel. So as the national conscience, did that give them any authority? God's authority, yeah. So who did they speak from? They spoke directly from God, the things that they were supposed to say. What happened when a prophet didn't do what God wanted? Who took care of that issue? God took care of that issue. Do y'all remember the story of the man of God out of Judah, 1 Kings? One of my favorite lessons to preach. So the man of God out of Judah was told to go to Samaria, preach against the altar there, and come back a different way, and not to lodge with anyone. And what happened? An older prophet went out and lied to him, and he listened, and he defied God, and so was killed. So again, God took care of the errant prophets, but the prophet in the land had an authority that was unique. He was speaking from God, direct messages from God. Now, this was disabused, right? We talked about Amaziah last week and the fact that he failed to listen to the prophet that was there, and because of that, he pronounced his downfall. So again, the prophet had a lot of authority. There were certain means of ascertaining the future or attempting to influence the future, and in those cases, they were forbidden. Who was the person that was the medium by which Israel would learn of their fate? The prophet. Now, were they to go outside the scope of the prophet and try and divine for themselves some other future? No, they weren't. Who did this, by the way? Saul was a great example of what not to do. And what did he do? He went to y'all remember her name? The witch at Endor. Yeah, that is a unique passage. It's always been intriguing to me because Saul, who knew better, sought a medium to resurrect Samuel in order to get the word from Samuel. So there was a high estimation of the prophet and that what they said would come true. But now Saul is violating the law of God in order to accomplish this. And we know what happens in that story. So again, certain means of ascertaining the future by the people were disallowed. They were forbidden. Why? Well, because of everything that went along with them. So the list of means that were forbidden included child sacrifice. So part of the pagan nations around them, in order to divine future events, would be to offer child sacrifices to the deities in the hopes that they would get a message or a response back from those deities. And in so doing, they would then know what the future is and could move on. Divination. What is divination? Trying to see the future, but using what kinds of means? Have y'all ever heard the statement, well, it's not in the tea leaves? Yeah, so that's a means of divination, having superstition surrounding very innocuous things. What's that? Zodiac, yeah, that's another one. Okay, well, the zodiac today says that I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that, so I need to make sure. Okay, so again, those are other means of divination. Looking at lambs and goats' bones, looking at the entrails of animals and seeing what they look like, and then somehow ascertaining a future event based on that. Is any of that effective? No, not at all. Okay. What's a great, well, there is a group in Greece that actually practiced divination that everybody sought. Does anybody remember? The oracles, yes. That was a big, huge pagan practice, and people would go hundreds of miles to the oracles to hear what they had to say because they thought that there was some special ability with this group. And so, what's that?
Didn't the Witch of Endor have a special ability?
Well, that is the question. That is the question. The witch at Endor in that story was, what was her response when Samuel came up? Frightened. She was afraid. Why?
She knew the rule.
Okay, she knew the rule, but where would the fear come from?
She didn't expect it to work.
Yeah, there was no expectation that this would actually come the way that it did. So my thought, this is my opinion, you can take it to the bank that this is Chance's opinion, okay? My opinion is that because of the fear in her eyes, this had never happened before. And this was a miraculous event by God in order to impact Saul. So again, you can argue either way that this was a common practice and that people did show up, like this and were able to communicate with the dead. But we don't see any other instance where this occurs and we get the person there visiting with the one who inquired of them. So that's my opinion on the issue, and we may have a study through Samuel to go through that and talk about that a little bit more. But divination on the whole was banned from the land. Why?
It's bypassing God.
That's exactly right. It's bypassing God and what He has laid out and His expectations for His people. What's the point in knowing the future? Why do we want to know the future?
So we can know what to do, but we should already be doing the things that we should be doing, and God will provide. And when you don't wait on God, you wait on your own self, you're going to hit that road.
Yeah, so excellent point. Joash says so that we can know what to do. And so if we think about the future, it might give us the imperative or at least some kind of idea of what we need to do either to get there or to change it. But where's our confidence? In God. Do we know what the future holds for us in every detail? Do we know what the future holds for us if we're faithful, generally speaking? Yes. So is there any need to know more than that? No. There's another element to this too. Divination was a big practice of the pagan nations around them. And so if God's people are now doing this, what does that mean about their separation? There is none. There's no separation. You're no different than the people that were in the land before you. So again, child sacrifice being a way or a means by which they could divine the future if they so desired. Divination itself, sorcery. What is sorcery? Spells, witchcraft, right? We see this in the New Testament. Where does anybody, if you can recall, where does this happen in the New Testament? And Samaria?
Yeah, like the sorcerer in Acts 8.
Okay, yeah, Simon the sorcerer in Acts chapter 8, right? He was one who did tricks to manipulate people, and he was called a sorcerer.
And Philippians, right? Where did they burn all of the scrolls in Acts?
That's in Ephesus. That's where I was going, yeah. And in the book of Acts, I believe it's 19. Acts chapter 19, testing me on my chapters this morning. You have all of those who, after seeing the 7 sons of Sceva run hightail out of this exorcism that they were trying to effect, what happens? All the people see this and realize, okay, so there's some reality to the demonic realm, and what do they do with all their spell books and things? Bring them to the city center and burn them. Is it wrong to burn spell books? No. All right. This is not something that was a problem in the sense that, well, we're anti-intellectual. This was spell books and things that they ought not have anyway, right? So they go to this book burning. The cost was insane. Some have tallied up the cost to be several talents worth of silver of these books that were brought there. Massive bonfire, repentance. So again, this was very common in the ancient world. In fact, you would see multiple writings on a lot of the material culture or material things that we have nowadays that have some of these epigrams on them that are tokens of protection or spells that should be for their wearer to protect them or to give them luck or to give them prosperity, that kind of stuff. So this is what they're talking about when we talk about sorcery, and also just outright spell casting, or the idea of being able to cast a spell on others. Now that doesn't happen today at all, does it? Maybe not in our culture in America, but yes, there are other places, and even some places geographically in our society where this occurs.
Certainly in Haiti.
Yes, very much. Haiti, Dominican Republic, you have a lot of this kind of ideas. And so sorcery was banned. Interpretations of omens, augury. This goes back to the entrails of the animals. And what's augury, by the way?
Like casting lots, kind of like idea?
Well, it's more along the lines of looking at things. And what kinds of things does augury typically imply? Augury is watching the birds. So if you recall, and you may not, the founding of Rome, Romulus and Remus, when they go to found Rome, they watch the birds to divine, okay, who's going to be the founder. Of course, they get in a fight and Romulus kills Remus, whatever. But that started with augury and watching the birds, and they came back to compare who saw how many birds and why and what they were doing. And that was the comparison there. So got any bird watchers out here? Okay, good, no. Augury is the idea that birds have meaning, and whichever ones you witness or see and whatever they're doing has a meaning for your life. Okay, and so that is the idea of interpreting these omens, or the idea behind augury. That's also banned. Again, why? Well, because it's foolish, it's pointless, it's all made up. And it doesn't really mean what you say it means, and it goes along the lines of the nation that they drove out. Now, witchcraft, that's pretty self-explanatory. This goes along with the idea of sorcery, spell casting as well. Mediums, this would be the witch at Endor. That's why she was panicked when Saul arrived, is because she knew that she shouldn't be practicing this idea. Now, what is a medium? What's their goal? Yeah, communication with the dead. Does God want us speaking with the dead? No, clearly, because they're dead and they're gone. So no need for that. But why would this be problematic? Well, again, first and foremost, it looks like the nations around them. But if they're seeking to talk to the dead, what does that mean for their disposition? Well, I mean, ultimately, yeah, but no trust in God. What can you find out from a dead person that you can't find out from what God's already told you or one of the prophets?
Well, isn't that what, in the story of the rich man, when he asked to send, someone to tell his brothers?
Yeah. That's exactly right. So in the book of Luke, we have the story of the rich man and Lazarus. Rich man, is he able to go back? No. Is Lazarus able to go back? No. Righteous or not, you're not allowed to go back. And what was the reason he wanted them to go back? To warn his brothers. But what did he say they already have? Yeah, they've got Moses and the prophets. Let them hear them. So again, the emphasis is on listening and paying attention to what God says for this life, not pursuing other means or ends that circumvent God and what his expectations are. So Again, that's one of the reasons why these things were banned. Now, the prophet certainly was the only one that was authorized in Israel to pronounce future events, because what happened if you claimed to be a prophet, you predicted a future event and it didn't happen? Yeah, him dead, right? You're going to die. What happened to the prophets? Well, that didn't happen because they prophesied correctly, and that's how you knew the difference between a false prophet and a true prophet. Now, just by way of reminder, if someone predicted something and it came true, but then they were teaching something contrary to the law, then what was that person supposed to be as well? Stoned, executed. Why? Well, but the thing came true. Yes, they were going against what was established, right? They knew the law, they had the law, and they could compare the law with what he said. And this goes back to the idea of fomenting rebellion. And then spiritists. This would be in the same category as mediums and that kind of thing. So, but people who were very, not spiritually minded, but relied on the spirits in order to help them accomplish stuff. Necromancers, again, consulting the dead, just another term for that. So the prophet, God would raise them up a prophet like Moses. Now, many of us have heard this passage used oftentimes with what in mind? What's that? Christ, yeah. Is that true or not? Yes, it is true. Is it exclusively concerning Christ? No. No. This is one of those dual fulfillment prophecies that you see all throughout the Old Testament. And dual fulfillment means what?
Now and
Yes, it has relevance to us now in the current position that we are in, and it has relevance later to messianic expectations and claims. What are ones that are exclusively messianic? Two, right off the top of my head, that are big prophecies concerning the Messiah. Anybody?
Pierced in the side, or like the Isaiah 53.
Yeah, Isaiah 53, purely messianic. Psalm 22, purely messianic. So you do have passages in Scripture that help us, Psalm 22 is a great psalm for overcoming adversity and relying on God and trust and confidence in Him. And even though things are falling apart around us, God will be there for us to take care of us. So generally, superficially, that's, what we can understand from Psalm 22. We understand the lamentings. But specifically, being hung on a tree, having his garments parted among those individuals at the foot of the cross, at his execution, his resurrection as king, all of those things are very specific and unique to one person. Isaiah 53, the same. Again, he was led as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before his shearers is dumb, so he opens not his mouth. Again, that is a specific reference to the Christ. So in Deuteronomy 18, we have this prophecy here that we need to understand is dual fulfillment. In fact, the text says, verse 14, "For these nations which you shall possess hearkened unto observers of times and unto diviners, but as for you, the Lord your God has not allowed you to do so. The Lord your God," now this goes right into the discussion of diviners and that kind of thing. "The Lord your God will raise up unto you a prophet from the midst of you, of thy brethren, like unto me. Unto him shall you" what? Listen or hear. Okay? "According to all that you desire of the Lord thy God in Horeb in the day of the assembly, saying, Let me not hear again the voice of the Lord thy God, neither let me see this great fire any more, that I die not. And the Lord said unto me, They have well spoken that which they have spoken. I will raise them up a prophet from among their brethren, like unto you, and will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak unto them all that I shall command him." So what's the role of the prophet? If you want to know what's going on and you want to know the message from God, go to the prophet, because that's where you're going to get the information that you want. And that's going to be the right and correct information. So was there a blessing to having a prophet in the land? Yes, absolutely there was, especially one who had the communication line open with God. Now, this ceases when? When does the prophet period end? Okay, Joash says when they're no longer listening. So objectively, when does the prophet period end? What's that? When God quit sending him? There is a distinct point in time where it does cease. Yes, the cessation of the prophets is the end of Malachi. Malachi is the last prophet in Israel until John the Baptist bursts onto the scene.
Then after the apostles, they end. There's no more direct revelation from God.
Yes, so the direct revelation ceases after the death of the apostles, right? So again, very unique, small window where it opened up again, God directing them into Christianity with their expectation that they follow what God had desired humanity to do for so long. And then we have the cessation of the prophetic voice again. But that 400-year period, in fact, in multiple works, you can read this in 1st and 2nd Maccabees and others, they say we're writing in a period or a time when there is no prophet of God. So again, the voice of God had ceased. Why? Because they had and knew what they needed to be doing in order to be pleasing to God. Okay, so the prophet had an authority that was unique. Moses was an intermediary, and so was the prophet. So again, why does he say, like unto me?
They're one-on-one with God, just like Moses was.
Yes. The prophet had a very close and personal relationship with God. Was Elijah close to God? How do we know that? What's that? Well, because he saw him.
He went to him.
Yeah, God took him up, what? In a chariot of fire, right? So kind of had a close relationship with God, kind of a big deal. But God spoke to him too, like he did all the other prophets, and encouraged him. But there was a unique relationship there between Elijah and God. So one of the things that is unique about the prophet is that they were an intermediary for the people. Could the prophet request good on the nation's behalf from God? Yes, they could. Did God always answer them in the affirmative? No, he did not. But you do have this idea, this figure in Moses that is seen in the prophets, and that the prophet can be an intermediary for the people, who is also an intermediary in this authoritative position, by the way. Okay, Jesus, yes, 1 Timothy 2:5, there's one mediator between God and men, the man Jesus Christ. That's now. But then what was another? The priest. Yes, that's exactly right. And not just any priest, but the high priest, right, would go in and make atonement for the sins of the people. So again, this intermediary principle is seen throughout the public or the authoritative figures in Israel as well. Two kinds of prophets were to be put to death, we mentioned, but I think it bears repeating. The one who pretended to speak on or by God's authority. Why was he put to death? So a false prophet, certainly a liar, right? Can you manipulate people using the phrase, the word of God? That's never happened before, has it? Well, God says this. God says this. Yeah, no. We have the law. We know what it says. You're a false prophet. You're done. Okay? That's pretty much how that would work if they were paying attention. And one who spoke in the name of other gods. Okay, so a prophet of Baal. Where do we see a prophet of Baal executed? Or many of them executed? Yeah, 1 Kings 19, right? Where Elijah executes the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, cuts off all their heads, okay? So again, that is the punishment that should have been rightly poured out on the false prophets. And false prophets were identified when their predictions failed to come to pass. Okay, this happens, by the way, a lot of times. I believe it's with, well, I can't remember his name off the top of my head. When they go to war with Ben-Hadad of Syria, one of the things that happens is he's told not to go to war. And then when the prophet comes out, he tells him, yes, go up to war, you'll be fine, in a very sarcastic tone. And he says, see, this prophet never speaks well of me. Well, he always spoke the truth about what was going to happen to the king, and the king ended up dying in that battle because he disobeyed God. So again, the prophets were identified by their predictions not coming true. The true prophets of God actually properly prophesied. Any thoughts on the prophets and their role? So again, going back to Deuteronomy, the point is to show that these figures would be authoritative in Israel, and here's the expectations of their conduct and what to do if these authorities violate the authority given. Okay? Any thoughts or questions on that? Excellent. So we'll move into more laws. 19 through 26 is a litany of things that are put together by Moses just by way of reprise from Leviticus, but not as detailed. And they're also civic matters and civic affairs. How do we function in this new society that's being set up? Were they to function like the Egyptians? Yes? No? No, not at all. They were going to be separate, and so they needed their own set of laws. Okay, they needed their own set of authority. So God had expectations for them living in the land. Number one was the sanctity of life. So chapter 19 through 22, really, what are we talking about when we talk about the sanctity of life? Was this a principle that the other nations held? No. How do we know that? Child sacrifices, murder, okay, all sorts of heinous things committed against others. So God's people being different, they were not going to be exercising this kind of practice. They weren't going to be offering their children to the gods. Now, does that happen by God's people? Yes, they do. Unfortunately, they succumb to that. Unlawful unions, what would this kind of deal with?
Marriage laws.
Yeah, who you can marry, who you can't marry. Typically, it would be with those individuals outside of Israel, right? You can't marry foreigners. You can't marry strangers, anybody who is not of Israel. We see this, by the way, in Nehemiah when they come back to establish right and proper order in Israel and Jerusalem. They have to put away their wives because they had married foreign wives and taken foreign wives. So not only that, but what else? In Leviticus, it deals with who you can marry among the families. You can't marry kin, all right? So there's a big emphasis on that. Now, was that the case always for humanity? No, it wasn't. Why? Who do we know that married their half-sister? Abraham and Sarah were half-brother and sister. But now in the law of Moses, that is against what God expects. Okay, so again, we see a shift out of the fundamental thinking into a higher level of thinking and expectation. Unlawful deprivation, what is that? Unlawfully depriving someone, right? What would this entail?
Can't take all the harvest.
Yeah, so withholding things from people who are deserving of it. This would fall into the category of extortion, the idea of taking from others or withholding things that you owe them. As an employer, an indentured servant was guaranteed what when they left service after the year of Jubilee, after the sabbatical year? They were guaranteed means by which they could go out and start their own life. Why would an employer, why would someone not want to have their servant be indentured to them? Especially on the 6th year.
Because not only do they have to let them go, they have to give them something as they go. Right?
Yeah, so it's a tort, right? You know, they're indenturing themselves at year 6. They're only going to work a year, and then I have to let them go, free them from their debts, and give them stuff to start again on. You can see how people would not want to do that, and why there would be maybe an incentive for someone to hold that debt over their head. So he's going to address some of those things in this section on unlawful deprivation. Fairness principle. What did your parents always tell you growing up? Life's not fair. But God is, and God has expectations of fairness, okay, in the way his people deal with one another. So we'll talk about that as well. And then unlawful desire, covetousness, those kinds of things, what people are wanting and desiring, and then ceremonial obligations we'll see in chapter 26. Any questions as we jump ahead? Excellent. So sanctity of life. First and foremost, cities of refuge. Verses 1 through 14 in chapter 19 deal with the cities of refuge. And what was the purpose of the city of refuge? Yes, sir.
For accidental murder, like manslaughter, and then you could run and hide from retribution in the city.
Yes, that's exactly right. You could run to a city of refuge. There were 3 in the in Israel, and then 3 on the Transjordan. Any one of those 6 that you were nearest to, you could flee to if you committed manslaughter, right? If somebody died accidentally. Could murderers flee to the city of refuge? Well, they could, but what was the requirement for them being admitted into the city of refuge?
There was like a priest there, I think.
The judges of the town would hear the story, and then what else happened? What other figure is in this discussion? Not just the guy who killed somebody, but who else?
The one who has a right to retaliate.
Yes, the kinsman redeemer is what they're called. And so the kinsman redeemer had the obligation to take vengeance on the person who had killed their family member. By the way, that was a God-ordained position. They had the obligation to go and set the record straight, set matters right. This did several things. One, it gave you an incentive not to kill somebody because you knew that if you did, you would incur their wrath and you would probably be killed too. So there was that capital punishment that was intended to be an inhibitor of that. And then manslaughter is a little bit different story because people can lose their lives, okay, accidentally by someone else through incompetence or not paying attention or whatever it may be. And so because it wasn't premeditated, there was a system. They would go to the city of refuge. The person who committed the act, or at least that it revolved around, would explain the problem to the judges there in the city. And then they would wait for who? They would wait for the kinsman redeemer to come. And then if he came, they would mediate that event there between the judges and come to a conclusion. If the judges of the city determined that it was not manslaughter, that it was murder, what happened to the guy? They killed him. So these cities of refuge were not places for murderers and criminals to go and to hide out in a sanctuary, right? It wasn't the ability for them to say, hey, if I can make it to this town, then I'll be all right. Because, again, there was an expectation of admittance into that town and the protection or the safety of that city of refuge by the judges in listening to that event. Now, if the kinsman redeemer caught the person on the road headed to a city of refuge, did he have a right to kill him? Yes, he did. It didn't matter if he was fleeing to the city of refuge. Okay, so again, there was a sense of urgency if this happened to get there so that you could be safe and let them hear your case. So that's what we mean by sanctity of life in this particular respect.
Chance?
Yes, sir.
Are the cities of refuge pointing out something in the future as far as the kingdom?
I don't know. I don't know. I have not looked at the cities of refuge necessarily from that angle. I don't know. I hope you're okay with that. That's a question that I've not really looked into. So then we get manslaughter, murder. You could go there if you were a murderer, but again, they would have to hear your case, and you might get away with it. You probably won't. There were 6 cities of refuge to which one might flee in the event of murder or manslaughter. These cities offered sanctuary from the avenger of blood or the kinsman redeemer. This was, again, a role that someone would play. Now, in Job, he makes the comment, I know that my Redeemer lives and will give an account for me on that day. What is Job talking about? He's talking about the very thing, right? The kinsman redeemer, someone who will come and stand up for him. So this is the idea that's seen here. I know the bell rang. We'll pick up here next week. I appreciate your attention this morning.